Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I've covered this before, and I realized I was having a conversation with my wife about these things. And I thought I would really talk about the derivatives market to understand how how bad the economy is and why really nothing else matters, because it's all about the economy and how it's collapsed years ago, how it's a defunct system that is completely ass backwards. So here you have the national debt, and I showed you this before. If you start counting now, right, it's about to flip. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, another $1 million, right? So that's how fast it goes right here. This is our national debt. When I started covering this past year, it was at 26 million. And the national debt isn't even really an inkling of the problem. It's at $28 trillion. Our income, this is the U.S. federal tax revenue, is at 3.5 almost, which is high for some reason. I'm not sure why it's so high. And, think about this, right? This is something that makes our country insolvent, but it really isn't the big problem. The big problem is down here with currency and credit derivatives now. And so we're going to come back to this. Let me just explain this in a way that's easily understood. So let's start here. So in 2019, there was 1.5 billion cell phones sold globally. That was 40% of the people in the world, and that was a total of $409 billion. Okay, so we understand this. $409 billion of cell phone sales in 2020. You see, in 2017, it peaked at $480 billion. So this was the highest amount of money that was ever made on cell phones, was in 2017. So this is one of the most lucrative markets, the tech markets, the cell phone market. And globally, it generates just under $500 million a year. In that industry where you're making something, like you're creating a piece of hardware, you're creating something that's physical, that's going to be sold, and it represents a whole host of jobs. There's all these software developers who are going to create the operating systems of the cell phones, and all the app developers that are going to create apps. And then there's the various components that go into the cell phone that have to be manufactured. All the moving parts have to be created, all the parts in the cell phone, and then they have to manufacture or mine or harvest the various elements that go into creating those pieces and parts. Then there's people working the sales industry and shipping the cell phone. So you see there's all these various jobs involved, people being employed, the economy moving along by taking these cell phones and creating these cell phones and selling them and all the rest of it. In terms of amount of total sales in 2020 last year, it's $409 billion. And that's a lot of money. $1 billion is a lot of money. But here in the currency and credit derivatives now, right, this is the derivatives market, is $618 trillion, right? And so that dwarfs all of the various other levels of the economy. All this stuff that's made and sold, all the services, all the things that are out there that actually exist in reality. They're not some abstract financial scheme like derivatives, which I'll explain in a moment, makes up a fraction of what the derivatives and how much money is being, this is money as debt. This is debt that is considered as having value. So to understand this, the gross domestic product of the United States in 2020 or 2019 was $20 trillion, which is, again, this is gross. This isn't profit. This was just the gross receipts for all of the, stuff created and made in the United States. On a worldwide level, the gross domestic product of 2019 was $87 trillion. Again, far less than the derivatives market and far less than the collective debts of the United States alone, right? To say nothing of the global debts, right? And so in terms of our economy, the gross, again, this is the gross. It isn't the net profit. This isn't profit. This is just the gross results, not talking about expenses and things like this. Receipts for the gross domestic products. And then for the United States, it's only $20 trillion. And so where are you going to get this money? Like, this is just the gross, right? So where are you going to get the money? Like when you tax this, well, when you tax it, you're not going to come up with $28 trillion. You're not going to be able to pay off the debt. So one of the rules of our economy is all the things that are made, all the services that are given, all the real things that people enjoy. Your TV, your computer, your clothes, whatever it is. Vacation spots, going to a restaurant. All of those things take resources. They're expensive, and they don't make a lot of profit. And it is nothing compared to the abstract schemes of the stock market and these type of financial services, as well as, or more importantly, the derivatives market, which is just creating debt and pretending it's wealth. And so for America, we have over $670 trillion of derivatives debt, and then all this other debt that I'll go through, and a $20 trillion gross national product and $3.5 trillion in revenue from taxes. And so the system, I mean, it's collapsed, right? It is completely insolvent. There's no way to pay all this debt back. I mean, when you have a $20 trillion gross national product, again, not profit, and you got a $28 trillion debt, if you were a person, you would have to go bankrupt. If you were a person, you would be so financially upside down, there'd be no way to ever get out of this debt and your financial nightmare situation. And on top of it, the derivatives market is a scam and it's illusionary. It's not real. But it's imaginary. It doesn't exist in reality. It's just, conceptual. It exists digitally. Whereas a cell phone is a real thing, right? The cell phone industry, it's a real need. It's a physical thing. It's a material thing. And it's something that's a booming market. People want cell phones. People want new cell phones. It is a developing and growing market in terms of services and all these various aspects to it. And yet it only brings in slightly over $400 trillion a year. And so this should show you how messed up our economy is. There are a couple of theatrical movies that cover this and explain it in a very easy to understand method, right? So you have The Big Short, which was how the credit default swaps created the economic collapse of 2008. And then Margin Call, which covered the 2008 collapse, right? And so both of these movies do a great job of bringing this to life in a fictional movie story where it explains what happened in an entertaining, they're both well-made movies. But with The Big Short, it explains how the early 2000s real estate bubble and then the subsequent shorting of the subprime loans led to a financial collapse, led to the 2008 financial collapse. And this stuff's been going on ever since. It's the same old policies and it's the same old economic system, but it's even worse now. And so there has to be these periodic resets because the debt and everything is so far out of whack, and all these illusions and distractions to keep the economy going, to make us perceive that the economy is strong and it's sustainable, which it isn't, either of those things. And so let me explain how this works, the shorting of the real estate market and the derivatives market, and how it's basically evil and immoral and unsustainable. And so when there was a housing bubble in the 2000s, they were handing out loans to practically anybody. And the banks were packaging these loans together in these things called tranches. They were selling them as financial instruments, packaging them together, multiple loans, different types of, various financial transactions. And they're packaging them in these things called tranches and selling them to like Fannie Mae or whatever it was, Freddie Mac, these various financial institutions. And they were categorized as prime or subprime or various levels. They were graded at how much risk was involved, right? And so there was the AAA, the ones that were the safest, and then there was ones that were subprime and were more risky. Risky in the sense that the borrower might default on them. And what happened was a lot of these loans had adjustable rate interest, and they were adjustable rate mortgages, and the interest rates started to rise. The Fed adjusted the interest rates, which made these loans impossible for the borrower, all these people who were given these mortgages, to pay off. I mean, substantially, it's a disaster, right? Like there's all these people who didn't know they had adjustable rate loans, and their loan payments doubled or quadrupled in some cases, and now they were on the hook for paying off something they couldn't pay off. And so a bunch of people figure this out, various, people in the economic sector, and they realized that they could short all of these loans in the derivatives markets. They could short them, which was bet against them, say that their price was going to go down, and they would, just have to find some bank to act as their bookie, because this is basic gambling, right? They're not making anything. They're not creating a service. This isn't about, making a cell phone or serving a meal or providing some sort of service in terms of the software industry or something like this, right? This is just complete gambling. It's betting against people's loans, right? Betting against these poorly done mortgages. And the other piece to this is these banks that loaned out this money, they were making money. They were creating money, right? They were printing money in a, non-conventional form. They were loaning money into existence. So these mortgages, these loans that they were creating, these banks weren't loaning out money they had in their vaults, because we used to have something called the fractional reserve system. And so what that was, the bank had to have some money in their vaults. Like it was a 12-to-1, it used to be a 12-to-1 ratio. So if they were going to loan out $12, they had to have $1 in their vault. So for every $1 they had in their vault, they could loan out $12. So if they loaned out $120, they had to have $10 to cover it. And it didn't really cover it, but at least made it so it was constrained to some extent, that they weren't over leveraged, where they were just loaning out money without having anything in their vaults to back it up. The housing bubble was caused by the fractional reserve system being loosened up, and banks just loaning money like crazy, right? Loaning money to pretty much everybody, and then repackaging these loans, selling these loans off their books, and lending more money, which drove the housing prices to skyrocket and led to these high-risk loans that were unlikely to be paid back to be repackaged into these financial instruments. And people who knew what was going on said if we short these things, it was a guarantee to make them a lot of money because they were going to fail. Like they knew these loans were going to fail because most of the loans didn't have a fixed rate. They had a variable rate. And when the Federal Reserve raised the interest rates, these loans skyrocketed. Some of them like tripled and doubled. And you had people who had these mortgage payments, not the loans, but the mortgage payments were like triple and double what they used to be. And people were flipping out because they couldn't pay off their mortgage. Right now, their payments were ballooning, and they were in these upside down houses because the houses started to plummet and lose their value. And so this was all a part of these, derivatives, a part of these poor financial instruments, these packaged loans that were collapsing and that had been shorted. And these people were making windfall profits on shorting these loans. And so even the AAA rated derivatives, these packaged loans, these repackaged loans that were supposed to be low risk, they started to implode, right? They started to be defaulted on. And so all of these banks who never thought, especially the AAA rated loans, but all of them, they didn't think these loans were going to collapse. And so they took these short bets, right? They acted as the bookies for these people who are shorting these tranches, right? These derivatives, these repackaged loans. And so now these banks were on the hook for all this money that they shorted, right? You know, and they were insured and they were backed by the government and they didn't have the money to pay up. And so that's what happened in 2008. Okay, so let's go back to the national debt clock and the derivatives market. It's $618 trillion worth of this stuff, which was betting against loans, betting against various types of things to fail, right? And they made money and it had value, but only in an imaginary sense. It isn't like a cell phone you can hold in your hand. It isn't like a service that somebody gives you, right? Somehow somebody provides a service for you. It's not physical, but you have these financial markets that are completely abstract. In this case, it's gambling, and it's, you know, created trillions of dollars of debt that is seen as being value, that's seen as having value. Because if you look at this right here, the total U.S. amount of money that's minted is $19 trillion. So that's all the dollars in the world is $19 trillion. I think it's another, like it's total, it's like 60 or 80 trillion dollars of all currency. So this is printed money in the world is under $100 trillion. And the rest of it is debt. It's stuff like this. So there's at least $2 quadrillion of global debt. A quadrillion is 1,000 trillion. There's at least $2 quadrillion worth of debt out there that's masquerading as wealth and it's being paid off. And so as bad as this number is, $28 trillion in our, you know, U.S. national debt, this is money that the U.S. has borrowed to pay the bills, right? You see all these things here. This is the U.S. total debt, right? This is the national debt, but the total debt is $82 trillion. That's just for the U.S. And then this is all debt here that they're not counting. Credit card debt is $969 billion. That's all the debt people are in terms of credit card debts. I mean, that's almost $1 trillion, which is a lot, right? I mean, $1 trillion is a lot. And then you have this section called largest budget items. These are our bills as of now, right? We have over $1 trillion in Medicare, $1 trillion in Social Security, and about $700 billion in military spending, which ends up being over $1.5 trillion by the end of the year when this is all paid out, right? And we only have $3.5 trillion in tax revenues, and then there's all our budgetary items. I mean, that's just part of our budget. And then you have, this is the commitments. These are debts that are commitments, right? Social Security, Medicare. Social Security is at 21 trillion, Medicare at 32 trillion, and unpaid and unfunded liabilities. These are promises our government. These are all promises the government has made to pay, and this is what they owe, right? Not now, but over the next so many years, and it's $159 trillion. So there's so much debt out there, and this is the income, right? We know from this that like the cell phone market, which is one of the most profitable and biggest markets in the world, the tech market, they're only selling this much money. I mean, they only sold that years ago. That was in 2017. They sold $409 billion, which is like nothing to sneeze at, but it isn't $1 trillion, and it certainly isn't $617 trillion. There's this great site here, which is called Demonocracy, and they show you the derivatives market. Here's the derivatives. It shows you how much $1 trillion is in terms of, you know, $1 million, $1 trillion. That's what $1 trillion looks like. And then they have the various banks. This is, you know, back in like 2009 or 10 or something. I can't remember when they put this up. This is the Bank of Mellon. You see how much derivatives they're on the hook for. This is the State Street Bank, and they had, this is a massive amount of derivatives they had at this time. And this has been around for a while, right? This is when the financial collapse happened. This is Morgan Stanley. This is all their derivatives that they had on their books. Worthless things, Wells Fargo, HSBC, and then you get into Goldman Sachs. Look at how much they have on their books in terms of the derivatives market. $44 trillion. And this is all, again, it's just, it's gambling money, right? It's money that, that people were betting against other financial instruments that were worthless, loans and things, and receiving money betting against something else, right? Shorting something that was, bound to collapse. It was a sure thing. Like anybody who figured out what was going on knew that all these loans were going to fail. People weren't going to be able to pay off these mortgages and these loans. Adjustable rate mortgages. Here's Bank of America. I mean, look at this. This is all the money that they were on the hook for. All these banks are insolvent. Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, that had, I think, the most, they had $70 trillion of derivatives. And this, again, I don't know when this was from, maybe in 2009 and 10 they put this out there. And this is collectively all the derivatives market at that time, right? And it's worse now, and this was $228 trillion. But we know now that the derivatives market is at 618. So that's look at what 228 looked like. And it's now tripled. This was, see the World Trade Centers and these are football fields and the White House, Capitol Hill, all these things. This is all worthless debt that's masquerading as wealth. This is why our system, this is why all the things that are happening now with COVID and everything else is because of this massive amount of debt. Here's another thing from this Demonocracy website. So this is what $100 million looks like, right? And so you could build a couch, all these things. And this is $1 billion. All right, you go, that's a lot, right? I mean, just in terms of how much room that would take up in your house. This is $1 trillion, and this is $20 trillion. This was the U.S. debt back in 2017 when they put this up. And there's the Statue of Liberty, and look at how massive that is. And now it's up to $28 trillion, right? So think about this. Like, this is just, I mean, the scale of this thing, these are $100 bills stacked. Like, and that's what $20 trillion in $100 bills looks like. Going back to this, because now we're at $618 trillion in derivatives debt. And now it's up to $28 trillion. So in 2017, it was 20. So there's $8 trillion more in debt. You can see it takes about, 15 or 20 seconds, maybe, half a minute to be another $1 million in debt. And that's just in terms of our government. We have credit card debt. We have our collective debt. We have our liabilities. And then the worst thing here is the derivatives market. So the derivatives market and various types of financial schemes have produced quadrillions of dollars of debt-based wealth. It's debt that we consider wealth that increases our spending power. Another example of this is when a company goes public. You can see this with so many of these software company, and they're going to have a public offering, and they have an IPO, and they have a financial institution that handles the IPO. So you have somebody who's created software and built a company and built a brand, something like Facebook or whatever it might be, Google or one of these major companies or a smaller company. And they have done all of this work. They've done, this work in creating something and building a brand. And then the banks, the financial institutions that handle the IPO and the people who are in charge of the IPO will set a price, and oftentimes that price will be low, and the people who run the software company, for example, or whatever company it is, will be locked in that price. And let's say they're locked in at $15, but the price, because of some sort of pump and dump type of scam, goes up to $95 a share. The people who built the company are locked in at that lower price, so they make some money, they're going to make a lot of money, right? Maybe their share value was at $6 and they lock in at 15 and they make a lot of money, but they don't make as much money as these, these vultures that come in and handle the IPO, and they make up the difference, right? And then there's the pump and dump aspect of it, and people get in and they see the price going up, and then the price plummets and people lose their pensions and whatever it is, right? And so you have these scams. These are, legal financial scams where, again, these people who make the most money on these like public offerings or some of these, shorting stocks or whatever it is, aren't making anything. They're not creating anything. They're not providing a service. They're just churning out all of these debt-based financial schemes to make more debt-based wealth. And these banks are loaning out, creating money through loans, right? Loaning out money they don't have based in promises. Of course, we have a fiat currency, which is based in a promise to pay. It's not based in gold. It's not based in something real. And so even our printed currency is a lie, right? It's just, well, we promised to make good on it. Our government is promising to make good on the $19 trillion worth of paper money out there. But most of the money, the majority of money, as we can see, is digital. And so that's where we are right now in terms of we're so ass backwards. We're so upside down. Like when you're in an upside down mortgage where your mortgage far exceeds the value of your house. So many people who bought houses during the financial bubble are in upside down mortgages where they have these high mortgages. Some of these mortgages are not fixed rate mortgages, they're variable rate mortgages, and they're upside down, right? Their house isn't worth what they're paying on it. And that's our whole financial institutions. And so at some point, it got so out of control that they knew they needed to do some sort of reset. I mean, this happened in 2001 and 2008 and again in 2019, and we see it happening now from 2019 with COVID and all the rest of it. Because the economy is so messed up, they have to take away some of these things. They have to take away Social Security. They have to take away some of these entitlements and promises and lifestyles that you think you've been guaranteed because it's a scam. And when people say, well, we could just take over the financial institutions and fix it, no, you can't, because it's the debt that's wealth. And so what these people are doing for you, the people who control the system, what they're doing for all of us is they're keeping illusion going that the system is strong and solvent and it's a good economy, it's a good economic system, and it is going to be there for us forever. So it's a confidence game. And so if you took over the economy, you would have to do that work. You would have to create all these various distractions and news events and things to keep people from looking at the cooked books, right? And so that's where we are. This is, we're in a system that's going to collapse, and it's a horrible system. I mean, it's a system that's built a fast-growing financial markets, a fast-growing financial system, because we get the value first, where you can go into a bank and they'll give you money to be an entrepreneur, or you can get funding or backing for your business like you see on Shark Tank or something like this. And with an idea, you can create a fast-growing business and within 5-10 years become a multimillionaire. And that's because of loaning money, having the value up front, and it makes the economy grow really quickly. But because of the interest, the debt, and all the illusionary value that's out there, and how these, markets just exploded with all these various ways of having these pyramid and Ponzi schemes. I mean, they're all just schemes, right? They're all just scams. And so, it ballooned up to all this debt being traded as wealth. And it's not, the people who will run the system know that it's not worth anything. And they're locking in hard assets because at some point there has to be what you see now in terms of a global reset. And that's why I say, you can't wake everybody up. And if everybody knew this, the system would collapse because it's our perception. It's the illusion and our believing in the economy that keeps it going. So I don't want to wake everybody up. If you woke everyone up, the system would immediately collapse. Everyone would try to get their money out of banks and realize The banks don't have it, and the banks don't have your money. Like if people had a run on banks, there would just be no money there's not enough money for everybody. It's gone. Like the banks don't have this money. They have maybe a couple $100,000, whatever, a couple $1,000,000, and they have millions of dollars of liabilities. They're insolvent. They don't have the money to pay you back. They've used the money in various ways, and they don't have to pay you back. Like they don't have to give you your money. It's not even your money anymore. And so if people realized that, the system would implode, and then we would be in some sort of apocalyptic Mad Max situation. I mean, it could happen just like that. And so what the people who run the system are doing is keeping the illusion going for as long as they can, and then, trying to do these various interventions like what they're doing now with COVID and the rest of these things to take away the Social Security, have some sort of excuse. Like, well, what could we do, the COVID? Like, what could we do? They can't say it's the system itself. They can't say it's the derivatives market or the debt or the economy and that it's a Ponzi scheme and this is what ends up happening. Like, this is how all usury-based systems end, right? This is how a usury system dies. What we have is a usury system, a debt-based system. People have, it's something they knew long before the 1920s and 30s when they rolled out a global usury system. Everybody knew this was going to happen at some point. Anybody with any financial knowledge knew that this is what happens when you run a usury system, right? You run a Ponzi scheme as your economy, a pyramid scheme. And so knowing that, when you understand this, because so many people in the truth community, so many people are trying to fix the system politically or whatever, it can't be fixed. The economy can't be fixed. And then there's the moral breakdown, all these other things. That's why I'm saying over and over again, we need better people to create a better system. Corrupt people created this system. And I don't mean just the people on top, because every one of our ancestors, right, went to, fell for this stuff. And so, this is a learning moment that we have to focus more on being natural and doing things, bringing God into the equation, the heartfulness meditation that I do, have a, internalized relationship with God. And when you create a financial system, you do it with spiritual knowledge and, connection to your soul, and you do it in a way that's backed by the spiritual hierarchy, the spiritual laws and rules and things. And so it's in line with, a divine system. It's something natural and pure, and it's honest, and it's, ethical and all these things. It's not based in greed and lower level human qualities and hedonism and materialism and things like this, like we see now. And so that's what has to happen in the future. You have to have people who are better internally with better character qualities that collectively create a system that is sustainable, and it is, it's fair and equitable, and it is based in natural law, and it has God's blessing. It's based in the divine principles, where the system we now have is demonic. That's why I always say only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.